honestly, like seeing like Tobin tonight, that name alone is fantastic. And I'm sorry, but I don't know any late night Canadian TV shows that I watch.
It's fair.
Like I watch your podcast sometimes, and that's pretty much it. You
I
know what I
like I
mean?
like
Like,
the honesty. I like the honesty, Bailey. Welcome to another episode of Tobin Tonight. We've got Bailey, Jordan, Neil on. Now, Bailey, we tried to do this, I think, during the summer, and it was a completely different story. My background was different. Bailey's background was different. Bailey was out and about buying groceries, getting a haircut, and I was just like, this dude has like the ego of like an Ed Sheeran, where it's just like, I'll do your interview, but I'm getting my haircut while we're doing it. And I'm like, oh my God, sure, we'll try it. Never worked, but now we have him on. Bailey, my first real question is like, how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm definitely doing better. Last time we spoke, I was in an alleyway, around the corner from a stage where me and my friends were playing outside. um, yeah, definitely. I moved into a new apartment. I got a haircut, as you can see, and I'm finally able to get back to work and getting back to doing what I do for the first time in a couple years. So it's good.
Yeah. I like though, I will give you this compliment, and I know people will just be like, how dare he start by giving him a compliment? But like I remember looking at video clips on Instagram and Facebook, and I'm like, yeah, the dude has pipes. He reminds me of an Ed Sheeran, but I'm like, that haircut, I'm like, just cut it. And then I was like, I think I even sent you a message where I'm just like, dude, just cut your hair. And I felt like I don't know him that well. So he's gonna probably be like, shut the hell up, man. And then like 3 days later, it's like, there you go. That's the guy we want.
Yeah, yeah.
So
No,
do
it
you get
actually.
do you get people that come up to you and just be like, man, like I get it, but just cut it.
So only people I know or people who are
Yeah.
paying me.
Yeah.
Those two. I get my grandmother and my girlfriend telling me to cut my hair, and then there's a place that I play at fairly regularly called Middle Eight, and Andrew's the owner, and he tells me to cut my hair anytime and then I put a hat on. He's like, "Nope, that's not good."
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're just looking out for your image. I'm surprised that it's not your
of
mom,
course.
the first person who just comes up and says, listen, love ya, but gotta go.
Well, mom just throws money at me and says, "Here's $40. Go get your hair cut right now. You got
Yeah.
no excuse."
Yeah. And then if you don't get it cut, she's like, "What'd you spend it on?" You'd be like, groceries." She'd be like, "All right, fair. Here's another 40." And you'd be like, I'm going to spend this somewhere else
Yeah,
now. It's like you're
yeah.
feeding the
I needed
system.
apples. Yeah.
Yeah, you're feeding the system. I want to ask you because I mean, it's great to figure out where everyone kind of got into music, their interest. Now, we're both Newfoundlanders, so I feel like we're kind of surrounded by music where it's like you just come out of the womb and someone's like, here's two spoons, go at it. And I'm like, I'm not a spoons
Yeah.
guy. They're like, all right, you're off to Ontario. I'm like, what did I do wrong? It's like, I don't know music. Did I get something wrong here? And they're like, no, you don't fit in here. But like, how did you get into the music side of things?
Honestly, I grew up around music, obviously, like you mentioned. It's like my grandmother on my Jordan side was a music teacher. My grandfather on my dad's side played in a band since he was 14 years old. My grandmother on the Neil side plays the spoons. Um,
So the
it's
spoons
just like,
relevance comes in handy.
of course,
Yeah.
it's definitely part of the culture, like kitchen parties, like sitting around the living room singing songs, and like that's what we do in Newfoundland. So it was just one of those things where I wanted to participate with my family, and then it became something that I could do for a living.
So like when you were growing up listening to music, obviously you mentioned the family members in it, but like who I guess were like your first kind of interest in music? Like I know for me, like I don't know the first song I ever heard or the first artist that I was kind of like drawn to, but I remember like I would watch Much Music and Backstreet Boys was a big thing. I know there's people out there now like, oh my God, I can't believe you just openly admitted like Backstreet Boys. Like, listen, I'm 30. I feel like that's safe. But
Good
I
music.
remember, yeah. And I just remember we went across Canada one time because we were helping my brother move. And it was like we were headed into Nova Scotia. And the first two songs off the ferry was a Tim McGraw song and Jimmy Rankin. And I just remember that very distinctively because I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. We're in Mabu. Why not play Jimmy Rankin here? Right? It's like the
Yeah.
same as if you're in Newfoundland. It's like, you hear an Enna Sister song on the radio. You're like, that makes sense. Like, you know,
Yeah.
but what was the first one, either be a Newfoundland artist or a world-renowned artist that you're kind of like, yeah, this is what I want to do?
Well, so that's the thing. I kind of grew up listening to like bands like Mariana's Trench and Fall Out Boy.
That's
Like that's what
I'm
I
okay
was.
with that.
Yeah, exactly. And so growing up, I thought you had to have blue hair and skinny jeans to be a musician. And then I remember I was really into the show Supernatural. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Jensen Ackles, the guy who plays Dean Winchester, he uploaded the video of him playing The Wait by the band. And that song has like 4 or 5 chords in it. And that's all you need to learn how to play guitar, essentially. And so I learned that just because I was kind of obsessed with Supernatural and I was like fanboying over it. And then over like it was probably 6 months to a year later, I was sitting in my basement watching videos and I found Ed Sheeran playing live. And I had heard his music up to that point, like A-Team, Gimme Love, that kind of stuff. But seeing him play live, it made me realize that you can just be yourself and make music. You know, you don't have to dye your hair. You don't have to dress up in any outfits. You can just make music and do that. And that was why I started, essentially, because I always loved music.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you mentioned Ed Sheeran, so like I guess my kind of go-to example now, I'm guessing I'm 30, so I might be like 8 years older than you. I don't know your age, but like I remember liking John Mayer, but then like obviously when John Mayer came out with like Your Body's a Wonderland, that's where I kind of get interested. But then there are people like,
Yeah.
that's not John Mayer. That's like, you know, like the media's John Mayer. And I'm like, all right, fair enough. But this is the only song I know of him right now. And then you got like, I think it's like On the Way Home, or there's other songs that I have it on my phone, but I'm just too lazy to look. But I remember these are songs that I got into because you've seen his range in vocals and how well he plays the guitar. But I remember I've never gone to see him live, but I remember there was a clip one time on YouTube where it's like recommended. And I think he was playing like a Tom Petty song in LA, and he just slowed it down. He did it at his own pace. The crowd was really into it. And I was like, yes, this guy does his own good songs. He does great covers, but it kind of shows you like, obviously, if you do your own great song, people are going to be like a fan of you anyway. It's always like how you perform a cover. I feel like people are either, yeah, they killed it. No, that was complete trash. And I felt like for the most part, the comments were like really positive. So I'm like, all right, we got in the books. He's a good artist. But I feel the same with Ed Sheeran, where I feel like Ed's kind of like this generation's kind of John Mayer, where you can go on YouTube and he's doing it all. Like he don't care. Like if you don't like him, he's like, all right, I'm just going to keep doing music. But I don't think there's really an audience out there that's like, oh, I hate Ed Sheeran. It's like, what do you hate about him? Just hate him because he's talented. I'm like, that's a fair reason to hate him, but I'm not sure Ed Sheeran is going to care.
Yeah, I think that is a thing. That's something that I personally actually have struggled with as an artist, you would say, is like everything, every aspect of the music industry and entertainment, they want to put you in a box. I say they, and it sounds, but it's like you also need to put yourself in a box to promote yourself.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing where it's like when people are like, oh, Your Body is a Wonderland isn't really John Mayer. That's not fair, because that is something he created. That is a part of who he is. And him being able to write that song and write the stuff that these people would consider real John Mayer, that's who he is. He can do all of that stuff. And you need to, I think, in my personal opinion, that should be appreciated more. You know?
I feel like that, like, because with Ed Sheeran, I think it was the first year of university at Carleton that someone had introduced me to Ed Sheeran. And I'm always kind of like a noob when a new artist comes out, where I'm kind of like, no, I don't know who this person is. I'll just wait till they get like a Grammy or something. Then I'm like, oh yeah, I totally knew who that person is. But my friend was listening to, I think it's like, it was one of his first songs. I think you mentioned it. It's like Give Me Love, I was like, okay. I was like, not really my vibe at the moment, Ed. I'm like, I'm not going through any kind of breakup here. And then like 3 weeks later, it was like, all right, Ed, you got my attention. And then it's like A-Team came out. I'm like, all right, still not really what I jammed to, but I kind of grew into it. And then you get a fan base when it comes out with like Shivers and all the recent stuff. And it's like, no, he's not really Ed Sheeran anymore. I'm like, as long as he has that guitar and as long as he has the Ed Sheeran voice, how is he not Ed Sheeran? Like, it's not like he came out one day
Exactly.
with a kazoo and was like, yeah, Ed Sheeran's got a kazoo. I'd be like, all right, he'll probably make that work too and get it over, and people still buy his album, so leave him alone.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
there
You
are
definitely get
artists
to a
out there
point.
like that. Yeah, oh, go ahead.
No, no, of course. Like there are artists out there like that that can just do anything. But I think every artist gets to a point where they want to try new things and they want to do new things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you will get sick of yourself if you're only doing the same stuff over and over.
Yeah, after a while, you'll just be like, all right, this song sounds so much like this song. It sounds like this song. Like, I think that was the thing that people hated about Nickelback. And I feel like that's a train now in itself where it's like, have we forgiven Nickelback? It's like, no. And then there's other people like, okay, I still like Nickelback. I'm like, yeah, it was cool to hate Nickelback for a while, but I'm not going to lie. If I'm getting ready for a hockey game and someone has Nickelback on, I'm like, all right, it sounds like we're going out and like checking some bodies tonight because that's amped up music. And they'll be like, all the songs are the same. I'm like, all right, maybe to you, but to someone else, it's like, I'm amped up about this song more than this song more than, and I'm like, cool.
Yeah. Yeah, the
It,
thing is you can say anything you want about Nickelback, but people know their songs. They still
yeah.
play live shows, and every recount you can hear about them as people, apparently they're the nicest band you'll meet.
Yeah. I just think people hate on them
So,
just because they're like they think everything sounds similar, I guess. And then they're like, I don't like that you're nice. It's like, all right,
yeah.
I guess I can be mean. And it's like, well, now I don't like you're mean. It's like you can't have it both ways. You
Yeah.
can't always
Yeah,
get what you want.
exactly.
I want to ask you, of course, like now, because it's with any act, obviously, to try to get more people engaged in your music. Like you do shows, whether it's at like a local pub, whether it's down here, Toronto, wherever you're located. I want to ask you, like, do you ever get kind of a bit of stage fright? Like, I feel like that's a weird question for a musician where it's like, well, if you got stage fright, why are you a musician? But I always look at it in the aspect of if you go somewhere new, it's not as nervous as performing in front of your own like friends and family, because if you bomb in front of your friends and family, it's almost like they don't even want to say that they're associated with you. Like imagine doing a stand-up routine and it doesn't go over well. Your mom's not coming to you and be like, that's my son. She's going to be like
Yeah.
going out the door, like, and you're like, mom, where you going? It's like, I don't know, you. So
Yeah,
do you
no,
find it
exactly.
more nerve-wracking to do like do you ever get stage fright here compared to up away, or do you find it more comfortable up away to do like going into pubs and performing?
So I definitely so I never really got nervous per se. It's always been more excitement for me. Like
Okay.
because
Jitters.
it's like,
No.
yes, it's yes, exactly. Like it's a challenge. You know that you have to perform, you know you have to do things properly, and you know that you have to, put on a show. And that to me is exciting because it's like a challenge, you know? And it's always a new challenge because it's always new people. But like what you were saying about performing in front of people you know, it's like if you saw me perform a year ago
Yeah.
and now I'm playing a show in front of you, I would expect you to expect me to be better.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, you would expect to see some growth. So I feel the need to show that I am getting better. And I feel the need to show that when I'm playing in front of people who have seen me play throughout the years, for sure. And it's
Yeah.
like, that's probably the most nervous I get because it's like, well, I want them to think that I'm working hard and practicing and doing my job essentially, you know?
So Bailey, if I ever brought in friends to your show, because just say I'm in Toronto or if I'm in Ottawa and you're performing, do you want me to undersell it or oversell it? Because I feel like as a person in media or an act undersell, where it's like, hey, he's just my buddy, we're just here to watch him, he might be okay, I don't know, and then after the show they'd be like, he's good. If I go in, I'm like, good, that's the outcome. If I'm like, hey man, this guy like sounds just like Ed Sheeran, he does everything like Ed Sheeran, and then next minute they'd be like, I've seen Ed Sheeran live, that was not Ed Sheeran, I'd be like, can't give that feedback to Bailey. So
Well, I mean, that
undersell.
feedback I'm sure would. I definitely value criticism. If I'm
Yeah.
annoying anybody, I want to know. But yeah, no, that's definitely a factor for sure. Because it's like, if I know that somebody is expecting the best show they've ever seen,
Yeah.
I will. I'm not sure if I can provide that. However, I know
Yeah.
that I can do what I do well.
Yeah.
So if you're just saying that I'm a musician and not telling people what to expect, I'm fairly confident that I would give them
Yeah.
more than
It's
they're thinking.
it's
But
setting the bar to the very minimum where it's just a, like it's almost people are like, well, okay, if you're really smart about it, it's like if someone says, all right, like, do you know this guy? It's like, yeah, he's a musician. Some people are like, oh, okay. And they just sit back and watch. But like, really, all I told you was his occupation. It's almost like if someone's
Yeah.
like, hey, is Brian, like, what does Brian do? Like, is he good at interviews? Blah, blah, blah. He's like, he's a podcaster. It's like, okay. Didn't really answer my question, but it's like,
Yeah.
like, all right, I guess I'll find out. I want to
Yeah.
ask you, of course, like, now I've heard some samples or like some live shows. I mean, it's interesting because before I came on, I was just scrolling through Instagram and you'll see videos, but I went on Facebook and like your mom got to be like the utmost super fan because she's like throwing up flashbacks or throwback Thursdays and she's just like, remember when it all started, Bailey? And then like the first thing that she showed is like you performing an Ed Sheeran song. And I'm like, all right, that makes sense, especially with your answer that you mentioned earlier. But I mean, how key is it to having like, I guess, family support you in that sense? Because I feel like there's two windows to that. There's one where you're like, yes, that's great, thank you. But then there's another one where it's like, all right, stop. Like, can you just not share as much?
I can see that being a thing for some people, but
Yeah.
I am very lucky in the sense that my family has been extremely supportive since the beginning. Now, whether that's because I was, failing at school and not doing anything with my life before I started playing music, that definitely plays a part. But they've always been supportive. And I can say that, I still call my grandmother daily to discuss what's going on in my career and get advice and her opinion and all of these things. Because without my family, I wouldn't be able to do this. Like
Yeah.
when I moved at home when I was 17, my grandparents and mother and father took my college fund and used it to help me pay my rent so
Oh,
that I could
wow.
pursue music. You know what I mean? Like, and my family, like, we don't come from money. They managed to save up a bit of money for me to go to college.
Yeah.
And instead of that, they just gave it to me to pursue my dream. And it's been that way since I was 17. Meaning, like, if I don't have groceries, I know I can call my grandmother or my mother or my father and we will figure something out. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And it's like without that support base, I can count many times where I would have been completely screwed, whether it was a
Yeah.
broken guitar or I don't have a microphone anymore, my cable's broke so I can't play this show. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, having
I
a
feel,
supportive family has made me able to do what I love.
I feel like it's good because if we had to try this interview a few months ago when you were in like the back alley, I would have been like, I really hope he has a good support system because it's not going to be me. I mean, I just be like,
Yeah.
Bailey, where did you go? It doesn't look very safe back there, and it's like connection's gone. I'd be like, I really hope he called his grandmother. Not that she's going to be much
Yeah.
help at this point, but maybe, maybe she'll just be like, what did
Well,
they want, sweetie? Do they want like 20 or 40 bucks? It's like actually they want 100, or it's my life. It's like, how much do I really love you?
yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
But I can count, like, I remember one time I was supposed to be moving in and subletting an apartment. And, I'm not going to get into names and what happened and
No,
where,
no.
but
Yeah.
the people at the front desk refused to let me in with everything I owned and left me on the sidewalk with nowhere to go. And
Oh, wow.
I was able to call my family and we arranged an Airbnb. They helped me pay for it. You know what I mean? Like I would have been on the street, like
Yeah.
quite literally with nowhere to go. So it's
Yeah.
like in this industry where it can be so turbulent, like if I can't play shows, I can't make money. If I can't make money, I can't eat. Like
Yeah.
it's so with the pandemic and stuff, I definitely would not have made it without my family.
So it's interesting because I feel like there's two aspects of people. I think like we're kind of coming out of the pandemic, and then there's people that are like, no, we're still in the pandemic, but things are getting loose. Now, my stance on that is more or less like I feel like it's been a while. We've been kind of caged up for maybe 2 odd years, and it's kind of like, all right, it's not as bad as when it started because now we have vaccines and things. Like, yes, it's still here, but we'll get through it. At the beginning, we
Yeah.
weren't sure. Now it's kind of a little bit more assertive. That doesn't mean it's still not out there. You won't get it, but
No.
it's more or less feels a little bit more contained, I guess, or a little bit more structured. But how did you handle the pandemic? Because obviously, you just mentioned if you're not doing shows, you're not getting paid, bills are coming in. Yes, there's a supportive family there, but like, how did you handle this all mentally?
So obviously the government helped with gig
Yeah.
workers. They sent money that helped that paid my rent essentially
Yeah.
throughout the pandemic. So I was okay in that sense. Mentally, it was one of those things like hurry up and wait.
Yeah.
Like you can't do anything right now, so just do nothing and be okay with that. And when it comes to writing, for instance, like you need experiences to write about. And once you've written, the last 3 years of your life and you have all those songs and they're sitting there and you're sitting in quarantine, not doing anything, and it's the same thing day to day, it's hard to write music and it's hard to do things productively.
Yeah.
So that was one thing I struggled with. I just felt very stagnant and I felt like I couldn't write songs and I felt like I couldn't, write lyrics and stuff because I had nothing to write about. I had nothing to express, because I was trapped.
Yeah.
And you
I
get
feel
maybe
like
one song out of that.
Yeah, I feel like that's interesting because we've had like other artists on from like all across the country. And I remember Parker Gray, like when you mentioned that, Parker Gray came to mind, and like she's from out west, but she said the same thing. Like she was in a writing session with uh I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I think it was like Greg Ryder. And they were like trying to be productive during pandemic. And she's like, honestly, she's like, I just feel like sitting back and having a drink and we'll have a chat and wherever it goes from there it goes. And he was like, all right, because he's like two people, first time meeting each other, I assume. I think that's what she mentioned. Because it's like a writing session or a Zoom session. And then I think out of that, now I could be completely wrong in this story, but somewhat on the topic. I think he came out with like Northern Lights because they just kind of sat, chat about their life. And I was like, all right, interesting enough. Like it's not always have to be this kind of sit down, be structured. Sometimes you get songs out of nowhere. And in COVID, I guess it was kind of hard to find meetings, find something to be inspired about. Yes, people came out with music during COVID. I was very surprised. I think media, like you mentioned earlier, how media kind of can put you in a bubble or a box where people were kind of like, why would Dua Lipa come out with an album during COVID? It's like, what do you want her to do? Like, do you want no artist to come out with anything and then we don't buy it? Like, yeah, I guess COVID affects everyone, but maybe she's kind of like, you know what? The world needs music. It's like, yeah.
Well, yeah.
So people will still buy it. Like, I mean, it's not like, what's an album today? I'm getting so old because I just go on like iTunes and buy the song. And I know that's wrong because people are like, just buy the album. I'm like, what about I don't like every song of the album? It's like, you did it when you were 10. I'm like, yeah, and I regret it. But like, it's literally like $2 for a song. And if you want to buy the whole album when it comes out, maybe it's 20, 25. But I'm like, all right, it still gives you something like, all right, I bought this for $25. We're in a pandemic. I'll listen to the whole album now because I have time. And if I
Yeah.
like 10 songs out of 12 or 8 out of 12, awesome. If I like 3, I'm like, all right, kind of sucks that I bought like 3 songs for $25, but I still bought an album. That's an achievement.
Yeah,
Help the artist.
absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's one thing, like when you mentioned like your mental state with the pandemic and stuff like that. That was one thing that I'd actually asked a few of my friends and like fellow artists about. It's like, as a musician, where the hell do you fit into a global pandemic?
Yeah.
Like, do you post your new music to share it with people? But then are they going to be like, dude, nobody cares. Everybody's dying.
Like
You know?
feel the room, Bailey.
But exactly.
Yeah.
So like that's the way I felt. I felt like if I'm promoting my music or posting live streams and videos of myself, then I'm drawing attention away from important things. But at
Yeah.
the same time, that's kind of why I'm there. As an artist and as songwriters and performers, our job is to give people escapism.
Yeah.
You're supposed to be able to come to us and think of lollipops and rainbows for a couple hours before you go back to the real world. So it's
Yeah.
not that you shouldn't write music about real things. I think there is definitely a space, and as an artist, if you care about something, you should express that through your music. But not every song needs to be relevant. Sometimes you can just write good music to let people escape for a little while. And
Yeah.
that's one thing that it took me, almost the whole pandemic to realize that it, like you said, Dua Lipa put an album out and they were like, why? And it's like,
Yeah.
because just because it's a pandemic doesn't mean humans stop being human. We still
Yeah.
need light and happy things in our life.
Yeah, I like that the reference. Well, I'm gonna go off one of your references there, like a kind of a pun. But I remember watching like Instagram lives and it's all depending on like what your personality is. Listen, if Luke Combs and Thomas Rhett told the whole pandemic off and said, great pandemic, I'm just going to sit back and relax with my kids, I'm like, fine, you earned it, whatever. But then there were people like out there like Lights, for example, that were doing live streams, and they didn't have really, I won't say they didn't have a clue because that's not nice, but it's like more or less like they didn't have like a goal in mind. They just did a live stream because they're like, hey, do you guys want to hear me do some covers or some of my own music? And people were like, hell yeah, I want to listen to you do your own covers and crap. And then it's like, all right. And I remember I like tuned into it one night because again, nothing to do. And she was like singing Smash Mouth. And I was like, Lights singing Smash Mouth. Okay, where's this going?
Awesome.
But she did it so good. And I was just like, I like Lights, but that gave me a new appreciation of like, she's just like great overall. Like I always kind of label, like just say if you see Avril Lavigne doing punk rock, you're like, all right, she would never be able to do a slow song. And then you see her do a slow song and you're like, never knew, Avril. What happened here? It's like my go-to example with that is like Nicki Minaj, when people just like, oh, she's just a rapper and she's crap. I'm just like, go listen to some of her actual like deep stuff. Like I think it's like Marilyn Monroe, where she just strictly sings. I'm like, it's good. Now, why didn't you release that over like the stupid WAP song? And then she's just like, well, because people like that song too. I'm like, fair, but I just think you get more attention with this. But I am a media person kind of dictating.
Yeah, I think there's definitely, that's a line where like there's different aspects when it comes to being in the music industry. Like,
Yeah.
yes, you need to sell your music at the end of the day, you know? Like, say you write an album and your album has 12, 16 songs on it. Not everybody is going to listen to all 16 songs. That's just
This
a
is
fact.
true.
But if you can get people to stream the album because they hear one song they like, or one song gets super popular so they hear your name,
Yeah.
then you have people buying tickets to shows. And then you have people buying merch at the shows. And that's where musicians make most of their money, because streams and streaming and stuff is just not, unless you're at a huge level, like someone like Ed Sheeran and John Mayer, like you're not making a whole bunch of money off of streams. Like you're getting something like 0.07 cents on the dollar per stream. So it's
Yeah.
like you're gonna make a living through playing live and doing shows and making music. And it comes to a point, obviously there are lines you can and can't cross, and that's personal opinion, but
Yeah.
you need to do whatever it takes to sell your music. So if you have 5 songs and you think these 2 show who you are as a person, but you think this song will get more attention, then you're better off going with the one that gets more attention, because then more people will listen to the songs you want out. Does that make sense?
No, it definitely makes sense. Now, I haven't seen the whole documentary, but I know like they did mention a Backstreet Boys documentary, and I know people are like, really, he's going back to Backstreet Boys, but like I remember them saying, I think it's like on one of the albums, it was either "Don't Want You Back," I think was a song, or there was another one that they were trying to figure out which one they were going to release, and I think 3 or 4 of the members really wanted this song, and I think Nick was like, no, this song is going to do better. I can't remember how it got decided, but obviously in the documentary they kind of discuss this. But it's really interesting because when I hear it now, I still got to watch it, but it's kind of interesting when people are like, isn't that weird how like even the band was trying to decide which song was going to be like more popular, and then even the label was like, no, maybe this one. And I think the label ended up getting it right, but it's not to say the other song wasn't popular. It was just like, this is the song for the CD that's going to get people to buy a CD. And I'm like, interesting. I think it could have been like Shape of Your Heart they ended up choosing for the actual song, but it's interesting to me because I'm like, wow, I did not know that much work goes into just, hey, like, wow, how are we going to promote this CD? Like, I look at it sometimes, I'm like, yeah, that artist is good. Whatever song they want to promote it with, I'll go buy it. But then sometimes you're like, all right, which is the song though that they think the masses will like? And I'm just like, all right, who cares about the masses? Just put out a song that you like. And it's like, yeah, but there's more to it than that. So I'm not an artist in terms of that sense. And that's probably why I'd like write 3 songs and be like, let's market them all right now. And then it's like, well, Brian, now they're going to want more songs next week. We'll tell them to F off. I don't got them ready yet. They'll be like, that's not how this works.
Yeah, that's the thing. It is a lot. There's a huge thing about momentum as well. Like, that's one thing, like, why the industry can be very difficult, because money is a huge thing in all aspects of life. And when it comes to recording and recording equipment, even like that stuff can get very expensive. And
Oh yeah.
like I released my EP, I think it was 2018, and I haven't released any music since. Now, part of that is on me because that in 2019 I didn't get into record. Then we had the pandemic, you know? So it's like during the pandemic, there weren't a whole lot of studio sessions going on. And I think I actually did send a couple songs away to be mixed, but then some things needed to be re-recorded, and I couldn't get back in the studio to do that.
Yeah.
Right? So it was just like things kept coming up, and like now I'm at a point where I'm just gonna like get some money together and get my own recording equipment, so that way I can record here at home and then send the files where they need to go, as opposed
Yeah.
to having to go and pay to be in a studio and stuff like that, because it can be very difficult.
I can imagine. So like I guess like when we go back to where you said 2018 with your EP, like do you find that at times kind of frustrating? Because I know with podcasting, like sometimes when someone tells you, okay, do it this way, do it that way, or hey, you might need this, and you're kind of like, well, dude, like I've got everything set here. What else do you want? But I find like for you, if you're very like interested in music and you want to put out more stuff, like do you find that sometimes frustrating where it's like, all right, like how am I getting this done? Like I got no studio here. There's no studios opened. Like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah, that it can definitely be frustrating, but I think that is a part of it. You know, that
Yeah.
is like people always say, like, since I was 15, I was told that the music industry is one of the most difficult industries to get into.
You were told
And
that
it
too? That's what they told me about media. No, no.
no, literally, but it's very similar. It's very similar because it's all about consistency. And consistency in most cases requires funding and consistent funding. So when it comes to recording EPs, recording albums, or even putting out a single, there needs to be some money behind that. And like that is where like that's the kind of the struggling artist thing. You
Yeah.
know, it's like I need to pay rent, but I also want to put a song out. It's like they
Yeah.
cost
It's
pretty
like,
much the same.
yeah,
Like
dude, it's like, do I pay my rent now and not release a song, or do I release a song but everyone knows me as the guy out on the street? Like, how does this work?
exactly. And it's getting to a point where now obviously artists do it all the time, and there are independent artists who make a living
Yeah.
doing this their whole lives, and it's like getting for myself to a point where I can be self-sufficient, where I wrote a new song, I can then record it, and then I can send it to this person or these people and see what comes back. You know what I mean? And I can do that
Yeah.
on a regular basis, and like that's kind of what I'm trying to get at now, because I'm trying to avoid releasing an EP and then disappearing for 3 years.
But the other aspect I want to mention to you as well is when someone goes on, just say YouTube, and I guess music is different, obviously, than comedy in this sense, but like when you go see a musician, you're like listening to their songs, say on your iPod or phone or whatever daily. And you'll go see their concert where they perform the same song and you leave happy. Or you might leave a little bit mad because they didn't play that one song you liked. Where I feel like comedians, you watch their YouTube videos and like just say it's like live from New York, one could be live from Boston, and then they go to where you're located and you're like, all right, I've seen all these jokes. He's really doing it like line for line, verbatim of what he did in Boston. It's like, no, no crap. And like you get to see that live though now compared to on a computer screen and you're mad. Like I remember seeing
Yeah.
Jim Gaffigan in Ottawa and knowing his punchline and jokes. And I left that being like, I got to see Jim Gaffigan live and I knew his
Yeah.
jokes. It made me feel better because I was like, I knew exactly where he was going. I liked the fans' reaction because I was like, let's see how the fans react to this joke. But there are some people like, I can't believe I just wasted $100 on something I could look on YouTube. I'm like, all right, but that's on you. I'm like, you knew what you were
Yeah, but
going
they don't
into.
get it, I guess.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
know,
you know
that's
what you were
that's
going into.
that's the thing with comedy. There is a similarity,
Yeah,
but it's very different. The only similarity is the crowd work, in the sense that as a musician, you need to get the crowd into it. You need to get them
on your
energetic. You need to
side.
make
Yeah,
them, yeah, you need to make them want to sing, first of
yeah,
all. And then they'll sing their heart out and they'll be happy. With a comedian, you need to keep them engaged the entire time with what you're saying.
yeah.
And it's, and like you said, with like repeating jokes and stuff like that, like that comedians have to come up with new stuff consistently to stay relevant. Otherwise, they'll just be that guy who had that joke or that story that time.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine, like that to me is terrifying. I pick the songs that I'm going to play for the month. I'm like, this is my set list for this show. This is my set list for this show. This is
Oh,
what I'm
wow.
going to play in front of these people, whereas a comedian has to get up there, look around the room and say, maybe I'll make a joke about his hat. Maybe I'll make a joke about that waitress over there. And maybe
Yeah.
I'll find a way to fit this joke into this segment. And it's like that kind of mental gymnastics that they have to do on stage is just crazy to me. So
I feel like
there's
a
similarities, but
yeah, like I feel like with the similarity too, when you said about a set list, like I feel like a set list can be a similarity in terms of jokes and with songs, because like you don't just go up on stage and be like, yeah, I'm just gonna riff this tonight. Some comedians will say that, but it's planned in their mind of, I gotta go with this story, which leads to this story, leads to this, and then their final joke somehow wraps up everything they did within that hour. And then you're like, punchline, got you. And I feel like a set list is the same way. You got to feel the room. Like you're not just going to do like 20 happy songs and then hit them with a sad song to end the show. Then people are like,
yeah,
I really didn't like the show. He made me cry at the end. It's like, yeah, but he played 20 happy songs. It's almost like you got to figure it out. Like I like sometimes when you watch musicians, some people just get up and sing. Understood. Some artists like to give you like 5 or 6 songs, and then they get on and tell you almost like this is their shift change. It's like, hey, I wrote this song like when I was 18 and I was depressed, but you guys really liked it. And then they know instantly what the song is. And they're like, yeah, okay, this isn't like the happiest song in the world, but I get it. I know where he's going.
yeah.
The next 3 or 4 might be a little bit more moody. And then he comes back and he's like, all right, thank you for listening to that song. Let's end it with a bang. And then you're like, all right, cool. So I feel like that's maybe where the comedy and music side gets similar. But I mean, I never really thought about that until you mentioned it with a set list of like, I used to just think or like musicians sometimes would just be like, I don't know why I did, but just got up and sang some songs and like, all right, this room looks pretty cheerful. Let's keep singing cheerful songs. And it's like, oh, okay, I noticed that they're not feeling this one as much. Let's change it up. I didn't actually really contemplate that there's actually a set list, even though I'm sure I've watched documentaries where bands will talk about that thing in particular of like, yeah, we did a show in London and we changed up our London one from from another because they started to figure out what we were doing next and we wanted to keep them guessing. I'm like, all right, cool, I guess.
Yeah, and then again, there's also like you have to do different set lists for different events too, because it's like if I'm playing in a bar for 3 hours,
Yeah,
I'm definitely going to go off of the crowd more so than if I was doing a 45-minute showcase on a show or something.
yeah.
So it's like it's the same thing, whereas like a comedian will have a 10-minute set for an open mic, but he's still working on his hour-long like magnum opus or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting. You know what? I really like how you brought that up because that's a good point. Because I mean, you go to like a Yuck Yucks, they're not giving a 20-year-old an hour stand-up special. It's like, all right,
nope.
I got 10 minutes here. Next Friday, I might have another 10 minutes. Let's see which ones kind of work, which ones don't, which ones do we keep in case we ever get to that point where they give me an hour or 20 minutes or whatever. And then you're like, all right, cool. Like, I mean, I've only done like one night of stand-up and where I felt like I bombed and I was just so happy to go on the bus ride home. But even in my own paranoid mind, I'm like, I bombed. There are people at that show on this bus that now know me and they just know me as that guy who bombed. But in like hindsight, they probably could care less. They were just there for pancakes. And I left then going like, oh, great. That's all they'll ever know is that, hey, we were here for pancakes and some guys are up doing stand-up. Some of them did good. Some of them didn't do good. And that's it. Until like later on in life where I'll meet like the How I Met Your Mother approach where I meet my wife or something. She's like, I was at that pancake house. You sucked. I'd be like, oh my God. Thank you. It's like, how did we end up together? It's like, well, because I thought you were still nice. I'd be like, but it ruins the whole expectations. You still think I'm bad at comedy.
It's like, yeah, I mean, I think all performers are lucky in the sense that, like, if you bomb or you have a bad show, people will say that was a bad show, but they won't necessarily remember you. If that makes sense.
That's
They'll just be
nice.
like, that was a musician that I can forget about.
Yeah.
So then when you come back a year later and you're better, then they're
Yeah.
like, oh, who are you? And it's like, you saw me play before, but I'm better now. So maybe you like it. Like,
That is fair. I think the funny thing, so to kind of, we'll go off on another topic, but the one thing that I liked about that is there's Carlton Stones from Port City. I think it's just Carlton Stone from Port Cities. And he made the joke that they did a festival one time in Nova Scotia, and for years he was just doing it as Carlton Stone and like the other two members that were in Port Cities. I don't remember their name right now. One of them left because of the pandemic, but then the next year they came back and they, instead of just giving them each their individual name, like Carlton, Emily, Keith, they were now labeled Port City. And then people were like, this is a really good band. I love this band. Where you guys been? It's like, oh yeah, we were here last year and the year before. We were just not called Port Cities.
yeah.
Yeah. It's like listening to someone on the radio where it's like, all of a sudden you're listening to like Olivia Rodrigo. And next minute she doesn't go by Olivia Rodrigo anymore. She changes her style a little bit. And then she goes by just Olivia. And you're like, this is a really good artist. Where's she been all this time? It's like, she's always been there. Like,
yeah. I mean, there are so many, like, I mean, I can't remember. I remember the day. I can't remember how old I was. It was like when I was like discovering the industry and music for the first time via the internet. But like when I found out that Dave Grohl, the drummer for Nirvana, was also the main singer and writer for Foo Fighters. It was just like, well, yeah, now I had heard of Foo Fighters and I knew that they were a big band. And I kind of knew the name Dave Grohl, but I didn't realize that Nirvana, Dave Grohl, and Foo Fighters, it's all connected and it's all one thing. And it's like, they weren't three separate people who got lucky and famous. This is one guy who built a career. You know? Now, I don't think I'll ever change my name, but...
No. I feel like that's the same way of how I feel with sometimes when I look at like, when I was growing up, it was like Blink-182 compared to Boxcar Racer and then Angels and Airwaves. Like I knew who Tom DeLonge was, but there was a point in time where I'm just like, whatever happened to Tom DeLonge? It's like, oh, did you ever hear of Angels and Airwaves? I'm like, there is no time for that, Adam. I asked you whatever happened to Tom DeLonge.
Yeah.
We're talking Blink-182. And he's like, just listen to Angels and Airwaves. I'm like, all right, keep dodging my question. And then you'll listen to it and you're like, why does this guy sound familiar? He's like, that's Tom DeLonge, idiot. And I'm like, I like this too. I like Blink-182. I like this. And then it's like, all right, good for him. But it's almost like someone had to kind of be like, yeah, that's what happened here. Right. So I'm like, okay, gotcha.
Yeah. And I mean, there is definitely something to be said about reaching a new audience. But then there's like your old audience, which like someone like you didn't know where he was or what he was doing until somebody told you.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess word of mouth is still going to be the best way to sell anything. So.
Oh, absolutely. It's like sometimes I'll look back and like everyone has their own, I guess, different artist period or different time where they like certain artists. But like I will listen to Bare Naked Ladies and I'll be like, man, I like Bare Naked Ladies with Steve Page. I like him without it, but he brought something to that band, which I thought made it a little bit more unique. But that's nothing against like, the band members now. They've still got good music, but it's just kind of like, I'm sure there was a period of time where people were kind of like, I don't know if I want to listen to Bare Naked Ladies without that vocal. And then when they give it a chance, they're like, okay. And then Steve Page still does his own thing. And you're like, if you want to hear Steve Page, if you want to hear his vocals, he has his own music. You can check that out as well.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, cool. It's like, it doesn't need to be so devised. It doesn't need to be like a war where it's like, you bring him back. It's like, we don't need to. People like him and me, and we're doing okay.
Yeah, exactly. I
want to ask you to kind of close it out, like to just do a kind of a rapid fire question here. But like, so we usually do this sometimes as a little bit of fun of a gag, but I just have a random question generator here started. So I just click it and then see what happens. All right. So one of the first random questions, and you can either pass it to me to go first or you go first, whichever way you want to work it.
It's up to you.
Yeah. Oh, well, you're very friendly. The first one is, what is your biggest fear?
My biggest fear.
This interview.
Would honestly, no. I would probably say failure, but not necessarily failing, if that makes sense. In my eyes, like if I get to like 50 and, no kids, no wife, no house, nothing, I will think I failed. And that's kind of my biggest fear. I want to have not just a career, but I want to build a life. And
That's good.
I don't want to run out of time before I get that done. So that's that's my biggest fear.
That's good. That's good. I feel like I will tag myself in with these ones just to be like, so it doesn't feel like you're stranded. I feel like my biggest fear, similar to yours in terms of failure, but my biggest fear is I think not. It sounds like we're going to be like two like philosophers here or something. Like we should be like university professors, but it's like I think it's like failure of not trying hard enough, and that doesn't mean that you did not succeed in what you tried in, but it just means that like it's almost like, all right, if I want to get Will Smith on this podcast or Jim Carrey, if I just send one email and they come back with no, it's like, yeah, I tried. Like, no, you didn't, because now you have to be consistent and prove to that person why you want that person on that show. Like, I remember actually before hopping on this, I remember sending an email to Jim Carrey's press, and I'm like, hey, if this guy's retiring, when's the next time I'm actually going to get him on? Because he's not going to have anything to promote. So if anything, now would be a good time to have him on, because I won't bug you anymore, because he won't be doing anything and I won't be needing to ask him because he won't be promoting anything. And then if they come back and say no, you're like, all right, that still sucks. We'll reach out again in a year. And they keep on coming back with no. You're like, all right, at least I'm trying compared to the one time. All right, so the next one is, what was the first show you've ever gone to see live?
That was Avril Lavigne in 2008 at the Mile One Center.
And how was it?
It was amazing. Blew my mind. She played the guitar, she played the drums, she played the bass, and she sang vocals, obviously, the entire time.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah, but are we sure it was Avril Lavigne? Because there's conspiracy theories around there that say that Avril has been dead for like so many years. I'm only kidding. It's definitely Avril.
This is before she disappeared, so it was definitely
real thing. Okay. Yeah, that's fair. I keep on reading those every so often where it's like, it's not really Avril. I'm like, how do you cover up a musician just passing away? I'm sure a family member would come out of the blue at some point, like, no, Avril has like this thing on her back and this artist doesn't have a thing on her back or something. You'd be like, all right, fair. I think actually it's weird because my first ever concert to see, again down here, was Vince Gill. And I know people are like, wow, like Vince Gill, really? I'm like, yeah, my parents wanted to go see a concert. They dragged me to it. I knew one song from Vince Gill. And I
know the name, but I don't know any music.
Yeah. Like I can't remember the song right now, but I remember it was like summertime. I was probably 16 or 17. Loved the song, heard it on radio once, and was like, love it. So I just went home, downloaded it. And then when the concert came up, I was like, yeah, let's go see it. But like 17-year-old Brian didn't realize he's not just going to do one song and leave. He has other songs. So once he performed that song, I'm like, oh, I'm bored. Because no offense, Vince Gill, but like I'm 17. My parents' generation like these songs. And it's a lot of like gospel, kind of like, gospel music-ish, I guess. And I'm like, I'm rebellious. You should be happy that I like the one song by you when I'm a rebellious kid listening to Eminem and somehow Vince Gill entered my brain. I'm like, yeah, I like it. All right, so let's go to the next one. Yeah, whatever works. This one's an interesting one. What was your worst experience in life?
My worst experience in life.
And this podcast does not count. No.
Never.
Yeah, never.
That's a tricky one. See, my life, in my opinion, has been pretty great in the sense that everything that's gone wrong, I've kind of learned from. So I wouldn't really look back, but like, and that's the thing, I've never broken a bone. I've never had any serious injuries. Yeah, like I've been very lucky in that sense. So
I don't want to talk to you anymore. No, I'm like kidding.
I don't know. I would say I was playing with a group of musicians, and I had a lot of hope for the future of that, and I really thought that these people were like, family. Like when you have friends that are family, and kind of probably the disappointment in realizing that they weren't who I thought they were for me in that sense. You know what I mean? Like, they didn't have my back the way I thought they did. They didn't care as much about me as I did them. You
That's
know,
fair.
that I would look back at that because it was probably the most disappointing thing in my life, because I really thought I had made friends that were family.
So like I don't mean like to, because I'm kind of interested in that topic there, but like not to get really deep in the weeds, but like how old roughly were you around this point when you thought all
This
this?
was this was fairly recently. This was
Oh,
like,
so
I think
I was gonna laugh. You're like, this was yesterday. I'd be like, oh my.
no, no, this was probably about a year and a half ago. You
Okay.
know, I think the pandemic really, I mean, when people get desperate, they do things that they wouldn't normally do, but it also kind of shows you what lines people are willing to cross.
Oh, yeah, that's fair.
So I just think the pandemic brought out some people's true colors and showed what people's real intentions were. And yeah, I just think that was a it was devastating to me as a 20-year-old, you know, boy. Just thought everyone was lovely. So
Yeah,
yeah,
that's it. It's fair because I feel like the similar experience, except like I wasn't in a band or anything. I was like 22 and at Carleton, and like you have roommates, and then you have like people next door to you, and like you're getting along great for like a semester, and then like things just happen, and then I kind of got outcasted as the problem, and I'm like, how am I the problem when I'm nice to everybody? But it just turns out where it's like he's too nice, and I'm like, I don't even know what that means, but okay.
yeah,
So it's just like, all right, this is not where I thought this was going to go, to the point where I had a roommate that came in my room and literally kicked my chest through almost through my own wall. And I was just like, and this is where the comedy part of me comes in, because I always imagined if that ever happened to me, I don't know why I would. I'm like, I would go through that wall bleeding and like be like, I'm dead. I took it and I'm like, I am not a big fella. I am pretty skinny. And I got up from that
yeah,
being like, damn, that kind of hurt. But at the same point, I'm like, that's it. That kind of hurt. I would think that I would be like laying in shambles. And I was like, all right, not the best experience, but okay. It's like now I
but
know
you're
I can take
stronger
it.
than you thought you were.
Yeah, yeah. It's like that's what I took out of that. It's like, all right, you guys are still all gonna be kind of mean to me. Okay, but at least today I learned that I can take a kick to the chest. It depends
Yeah,
on the weight
that's
of the person, but and the strength, but I learned that I could take a kick to the chest.
I think that is undervalued a little bit, because when
Yeah,
I look
taking a
back at
kick to the
times
chest.
that,
No, no.
well, just struggling in general. Like, I mean, I
Yeah,
never had a whole lot of friends growing up. Like, I was always a little bit weird. I was, the kid wearing the Spider-Man costume on the school bus.
yeah.
And like,
I
that's
heard you
just
still
who I
do.
was.
No,
Oh, well, if I
no.
had one.
Yeah,
Um,
that's fair.
yeah. But that's the thing. Like, I think not being accepted and having to deal with that and realizing that not everybody's going to like you, just because not everybody likes everybody else. There are different personalities and different people. I think it's valuable to go through that and learn what you can take emotionally and even physically in certain instances. Violence is never okay, but you fall off your bike, you scrape your knee, and you get up and
Yeah,
you realize you're okay, and you realize that it's just a scrape on the knee. You're going to be fine.
yeah,
Like,
that's
that
fair.
is something that, yeah.
So for the last question, and then we'll just do a quick thing at the end here. But for the last one for random generator, it said, that's one that's not actually bad. Where would you like to see yourself in 10 years time? You kind of answered that earlier, but I want to like, where would you like to see yourself in 10 years time?
In 10 years' time, I would like to be in a situation where I can tour for most of the year, and whether that be doing, local shows, Toronto, Newfoundland, or, anywhere else that they'll take me. Just being able to go on tour and play consistently, and then have somewhere to come back to that I can call home.
Nice.
That's what I'm aiming towards before. Well, I'm 23 now, so I'll be 33 in 10 years. So I'm
Oh,
hoping by then I have a place to call home and a career that I can work at consistently.
oh wow. Okay. See, earlier when we started this, I thought you were like 22. So and that was just me guessing. So I wasn't too far off. Yeah. So for me, for 10 years, I I mean, there's a part of me that really wants to say go big or go home. So I feel like I want to be on like like on a platform, whether it be like CTV, CBC, or just I guess in syndication, which kind of feels weird to say
Yeah.
because like, you know, I I know we're on Rogers TV. I know this is going to be on Rogers TV at some point. And that's kind of cool. But I feel like the more networks you're on or the more eyes see you, obviously for someone like myself, that's great. But I used to think like, oh, that has to happen right away. But I feel like in 10 years time, if you're in syndication on different networks, if like you're seeing a lot more followers, if everything keeps on increasing, I think that's a good start or a good place to kind of go compared to if you're like, yeah, in 10 years time, if I'm not on like NBC, it's a fail. I'd be like, all right, well, you're not on NBC, but people in Newfoundland know who you are. People in Ottawa know who you are. Canada knows who you are. I'd be like, all right, so it maybe took 10 years to do that, but it's better than nothing.
Absolutely. Dude, honestly, like seeing like Tobin Tonight, that name alone is fantastic. And I'm sorry, but I don't know any late night Canadian TV shows that I watch.
It's fair.
I watch your podcast sometimes, and that's pretty much it.
I like the honesty. I like the honesty, Bailey. It wasn't like I watch it all the time.
thing.
I watch it sometimes. I'm like, oh yes, sometimes. Now in like 10 years,
dude,
Bailey will be like, I watch it all the time.
Well, but that's the thing. If you pop up in my newsfeed and you're talking to somebody, I'm confident that's going to be an interesting conversation. That's like for sure.
That's going to do it for this episode of Tobin Tonight. Our thanks to Bailey Jordan Neal for coming on to the show. Remember, you can find past, present, and future episodes on TobinTonight.com, Spotify, and iTunes. Follow us on Twitter, like us on Facebook, and leave a comment or two. For Tobin and myself, this is Jacob saying, thank you for listening, and good night.